The Mediterranean was calm at 4:15 in the morning at Haifa port, Israel's largest naval installation, its primary commercial harbor, and the beating logistical heart of the entire northern military district. The night shift was routine. Patrol boats moved in slow arcs across the outer perimeter. Sailors checked manifest. A destroyer sat at its berth, taking on fuel. Two corvettes were anchored in the inner basin. The submarine pen on the northern edge of the facility hummed with low electrical activity. Radar swept the horizon in its mechanical rhythm. Nothing unusual, nothing incoming. Then the horizon changed. At 417, the first contact appeared on radar, a single low-altitude signature moving fast from the northwest. The operator flagged it. Before the flag was processed, 40 more contacts appeared, then 100. Then the screen became white noise. 400 separate radar returns filling every quadrant simultaneously. Moving at speeds that the system's threat assessment algorithm had never been asked to process in volume, the algorithm froze. The operator reached for the alert button. He was 2 seconds too late. The first wave of Turkish-manufactured Atmaka anti-ship missiles transferred to the Ergun, a covert arms transaction that Ankara spent 6 months denying and the past 48 hours refusing to confirm, struck the outer breakwater at 41,833 local time. The second wave hit the fuel depot. The third wave, carrying the heaviest warheads in the package, arrived 17 seconds after the second and struck the bursts. Where Israel's surface fleet was docked in the quiet geometry of a normal peacetime morning, by 43,113 minutes after first impact, Haifa port was no longer a naval installation. It was a fire. The Israeli Navy, the service that had projected Israeli power across the Eastern Mediterranean for 6 decades, that had blockaded Gaza, interdicted Iranian weapons shipments, and served as the hard edge of Israeli strategic reach beyond its land borders, ceased to exist as an operational force in 13 minutes, and the United States Sixth Fleet, operating less than 300 nautical miles away in international waters, received every radar track, every missile trajectory, every impact coordinate in real time. Its destroyers had targeting solutions. Its aircraft had been airborne since the first contacts appeared. The order to engage never came when the sun rose. Over Haifa, what was left was wreckage smoke, and a question that nobody in Washington was prepared to answer: what is an alliance worth when its guarantor watches from a safe distance while its partner burns? You are watching us, Command Insight, and if you are here for the first time, tonight is the night to understand what this channel is about. We do not traffic in comfort. We do not manage your emotions toward a preferred political conclusion. We follow the evidence where it leads, through the weapons, the strategy, the economics, the politics, and the human will behind every major military event reshaping this world. What happened at Haifa this morning is not a news story. It is a strategic earthquake. The aftershocks will reach every corner of the international order. Subscribe now, turn on every notification, because the story developing in front of us in real time is the story of how the world we thought we understood stops being true. For questions for this morning, for questions that cut to the marrow of what happened and what it means. First, how does a NATO member state transfer 400 advanced anti-ship missiles to Iran, a country under comprehensive Western sanctions designated by the United States as a state sponsor of terrorism, without triggering the alliance mechanism specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of defection? Was this a failure of NATO intelligence, a deliberate blind eye, or evidence that the alliance is already functionally broken in ways that its public posture refuses to admit? Second, the Maka missile, Turkey's domestically developed precision anti-ship weapon, was designed with NATO interoperability as one of its core specifications. It was built to operate within NATO's targeting and communications architecture. When 400 of them flew into Haifa port this morning, they were not just striking an Israeli naval base. They were demonstrating that NATO technology, NATO engineering doctrine, and, by implication, NATO's own industrial investment can be turned against NATO's closest regional partner. What does that mean for every other NATO ally that has purchased or co-developed weapons with Turkey? Third, Israel's naval doctrine has always rested on qualitative superiority: better ships, better sensors, better trained crews over any adversary it was likely to face. Tonight, that doctrine was not outmatched by a superior adversary. It was overwhelmed by volume. 400 missiles is not a qualitative challenge. It is a quantitative eraser. Has the era of the sophisticated small navy reached its end? Replaced by a world in which the side that can flood the engagement envelope with the most simultaneous threats wins, regardless of individual platform quality? Fourth, the Turkish government has now placed itself in a position of direct material responsibility for the destruction of a NATO partner's naval infrastructure and the deaths of Israeli sailors. The consequences of that position for Turkey's relationship with NATO, with the United States, with the European Union, and with the broader international order are incalculable. What does Erdogan think he is buying with this action? And is he right? Let's find out. To understand what happened this morning, you need to understand what Haifa port is and what it was designed to survive. Haifa is not simply a harbor. It is the node through which Israel's northern military district is supplied, sustained, and projected. The naval base sits adjacent to the commercial port in a co-located complex that stretches nearly 4 kilometers along the bay. The military section includes permanent berths for the Sahar-class corvette fleet, a submarine tender facility, weapons storage and maintenance infrastructure, a command and communications center, and fuel storage sufficient to sustain Israeli naval operations for a minimum of 60 days without resupply. The entire complex is protected by a layered air and missile defense architecture. The Barerik 8 Naval Air Defense System, one of the most capable ship-based missile defense platforms in the world, jointly developed with India, covers the seaward approaches. Iron Dome batteries cover the landside perimeter. Rafael Sadu, the naval variant specifically designed for close-in defense of port facilities, was installed at Haifa following the 20,121 threat assessment that identified the port as a priority Iranian target. On paper, this was one of the most heavily defended naval installations in the world. The Amaka missiles did not attack it on paper. Iran's Zerg Aerospace Force, working with targeting data provided by Iranian naval surveillance assets and supplemented by intelligence from regional proxy networks, planned the strike around a single operational insight. Every layered defense system has a saturation threshold. The question is not whether the system can intercept individual missiles. It can. The question is how many simultaneous engagements it can sustain before it runs out of interceptors. Before its fire control radar is overwhelmed by target assignments, it cannot process fast enough before the engagement timeline between a detected threat and an impacted target compresses below the system's minimum reaction window. 400 missiles launched in coordinated waves from multiple vectors was the answer to that question. The first wave of 80 missiles came from the northwest from the open Mediterranean, launched from Iranian naval vessels operating under commercial cover that had positioned themselves over a period of weeks in international shipping lanes. This vector was chosen deliberately. The Barak 8 system's optimal engagement geometry is designed around threats approaching from the east and northeast, from Lebanese territory, from Syrian coastal positions. A threat from the open sea to the northwest puts the system in a less favorable engagement posture and reduces the effective range at which intercepts can be attempted. The second wave of 120 missiles came 6 seconds behind the first from the northeast conventional attack axis, but timed to arrive simultaneously with the first wave so that the fire control system was forced to split its engagement capacity between 2 simultaneous threat streams rather than dedicating full resources to one. The third and fourth waves, the remaining 200 missiles, came from the east and southeast low-altitude terrain-hugging profiles that used the Carmel mountain range to mask their approach until they were inside the minimum engagement range of several of the defending batteries. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. Israeli naval vessels in the outer harbor attempted emergency departures. 2 SAR-6 corvettes managed to clear the inner breakwater before they were struck. 3 did not. The submarine that was in the maintenance facility never had a chance to move. The fuel depot, 3 million liters of naval fuel, caught in the second wave and produced a secondary explosion large enough to be detected by seismographs in Cyprus. When the last missile impacted, Israel's surface fleet in Haifa had been reduced from 7 operational vessels to 1, a patrol boat that had been on an offshore training exercise and was not present in the harbor. The submarine force, which had been Israel's most strategic naval asset, lost its shore support infrastructure entirely, rendering its vessels operationally limited within days. Even if they survived at sea, 13 minutes. 6 decades of Israeli naval power gone. The Atmaka is a story that deserves to be told in full, because it reveals something important about how the global weapons market, the politics of NATO, and the strategic calculations of middle powers have combined to produce a moment that none of the architects of the post-Cold War anticipated. Turkey began developing the Atmaka. The name means hawk in Turkish in the early 2010s as part of a broader indigenous defense industrialization program driven by the realization that dependence on American and European weapons systems created strategic vulnerabilities. If Washington decided to impose an arms embargo, as it did following Turkey's purchase of the Russian S-400 air defense system, Turkey needed the ability to sustain its own military capability without external supply. The program succeeded beyond most external assessments. The Atmaka entered operational service with the Turkish Navy in 2021. It is a subsonic Sekming anti-ship missile with a range of approximately 250 kilometers, a 2,550 kilograms warhead, and a terminal guidance system that combines active radar with infrared imaging, a 120 dual seeker configuration that makes it significantly harder to decoy than single seeker designs. Its flight profile, extremely low altitude, overwater final approach at wavetop height, is specifically designed to defeat ship-based and shore-based radar systems that have difficulty tracking targets below a certain elevation angle. It is by any objective assessment one of the most capable anti-ship missiles currently in production anywhere in the world, and it was built with NATO standards, NATO interoperability specifications, and in many cases with components sourced from NATO member states' defense industries. How did 400 of them end up in Iranian hands? The transfer did not happen overnight. The intelligence picture that has emerged in the hours since the strike from American, European, and Israeli sources who are furious, terrified, and in several cases disbelieving describes a covert arrangement that was constructed over approximately 18 months and executed through a chain of intermediaries, shell companies, and third-country transit points sophisticated enough to avoid detection until the missiles were already in Iranian territory. The arrangement reportedly originated in a bilateral negotiation between Erdogan's government and senior ERG commanders that took place on the margins of a regional economic summit. The currency of the deal was not conventional. Iran did not simply pay for the missiles in cash or oil. The arrangement reportedly included Iranian commitments on a range of Turkish strategic interests, including Iranian influence over Kurdish militant networks that operate along the Turkish-Iranian border, intelligence sharing on opposition groups, and economic arrangements connected to Turkey's role as a sanctions bypass corridor for Iranian oil. This is how the new geopolitics works. Transactions between states are no longer simply commercial, they are multidimensional strategic exchanges in which weapons, intelligence, economic access, and political commitments are bundled together in arrangements that defy simple categorization as either alliance or enmity. Turkey is a NATO member that just armed Iran with weapons capable of destroying a NATO partner's navy. Both of those facts are simultaneously true. The international order does not currently have a framework for processing that reality. The Makkah's performance this morning validated every specification claim Turkey made for it. The dual-seeker terminal guidance proved effective against Israel's electronic countermeasures. The wavetop flight profile defeated the radar coverage at the critical angles. The warhead proved sufficient to disable or destroy every vessel it struck with a single hit. Turkish defense engineers watching the battle damage assessment data, which will inevitably reach them through back channels, will view this morning as the most expensive and brutal product demonstration in their industry's history. Iran, for its part, acquired 400 precision anti-ship weapons without having to develop them, without having to test them, without having to build the industrial infrastructure to produce them. It paid for them in strategic currency, influence, intelligence, access that costs Iran nothing in the conventional sense and yet delivers everything a strategic partner needs. This is the economics of the emerging world order. Manufacturing capability, indigenous development, and sanctions resilience are strategic assets. The ability to trade, influence, and access for advanced weapons that others have already built and proven is a force multiplier that requires no factory, no physicist, and no 5-year development program. Let us now address the earthquake inside the earthquake. Turkey has been a NATO member since 1952. It hosts American nuclear weapons at Incirlik Air Base. It controls the Bosphorus Strait, the only maritime passage between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean under the Montreux Convention, giving it a choke point of extraordinary strategic value. Its military is the second largest in NATO by personnel. Its geographic position bridging Europe, the Middle East, the Caucasus, and Central Asia makes it one of the most strategically located states on Earth. It has also, under Erdogan, become something that NATO's founding architects could not have conceived. A member of the Western alliance that is simultaneously developing deep strategic relationships with Russia, China, and now demonstrably Iran. The S-400 purchase in 2019 was the first major rupture. Washington responded by removing Turkey from the F-35 program and imposing COTSA sanctions, the legislation designed to punish states that purchase Russian military equipment. Erdogan absorbed the punishment and kept the S-400. The message he sent was explicit. Turkey's strategic autonomy is not for sale, and the cost of attempting to discipline Turkey through sanctions is a Turkey that drifts further from the Western orbit. Washington did not fully internalize that message. It treated the S-400 episode as an aberration, a transactional dispute between allies that could be managed through economic pressure and diplomatic engagement.